The dragon stables smelled like sulfur and burnt metal. Tae-sung walked between the massive sleeping forms, carrying a bucket of cleaning supplies that felt too heavy in his tired hands. Above him, the creatures stretched 50 meters from nose to tail, their scales glinting under the harsh station lights. These were the Velkathari, the warrior dragons of the Draxith Empire, and they were the reason humanity had lost its freedom. 3 years ago, the Draxith had arrived at Earth with their fleet of living weapons. The war lasted 6 months. Now, humans worked as servants across 70 conquered star systems, fixing ships and cleaning stables for an empire that saw them as nothing more than useful insects. Tae-sung was 23 years old and hated every moment of his life on Outpost Talon 9. His father, Dong-min, was the chief engineer, a position that came with respect and better food rations. Tae-sung should have been working alongside him, learning to repair the massive starships. Instead, he was here, punishment for asking too many questions about the resistance movements back on Earth. The dragon in front of him stirred. Ashwing, the handlers called it. The creature was famous for burning 3 workers last month when they moved too slowly. Its rider, a scarred Draxith commander named Vekthar, demanded perfection. The dragon's scales were dirty from a recent battle, crusted with dried blood that was not its own. Tae-sung set down his bucket and began scrubbing. The dragon's breathing was heavy, rattling. He noticed a deep gash along its side, poorly bandaged. The Draxith treated their dragons like machines, fixing only what was necessary to keep them fighting. Tae-sung felt something twist in his chest. Even monsters could feel pain. Without thinking, he started humming. It was an old song his grandmother used to sing when he was small, back when Earth was still free. Spring's Promise, she called it. A simple melody about flowers and sunshine and better days ahead. His grandmother was gone now, killed in the invasion, but her songs remained in his memory. The dragon's breathing changed. The rattling stopped. Tae-sung froze, his hand still on the bloody scales. Ashwing's massive eye opened, focusing on him with an intelligence that made his blood run cold. Dragons were not supposed to notice individual humans. They were bonded to their riders, aware of nothing else, but Ashwing was staring directly at him. The dragon's head turned slowly, bringing its snout close enough that Tae-sung could feel the heat of its breath. He should run. Everyone knew what happened to handlers who startled a Velkathari. But his legs would not move. The bucket fell from his numb fingers, clattering against the metal floor. The dragon made a sound, not a roar or a hiss, something softer, almost curious. Tae-sung swallowed hard and continued humming, not knowing what else to do. The melody filled the quiet stable. Ashwing closed its eye again, but its breathing remained calm, almost peaceful. Minutes passed. The dragon did not move, did not attack, just listened. When Tae-sung finally backed away, his heart was hammering so hard he thought it might burst. He grabbed his bucket and hurried to the next stall, hands shaking. What had just happened? Dragons did not behave like that. They were weapons, programmed through telepathic bonds to obey and destroy. Over the following weeks, Tae-sung returned to his duties. The incident with Ashwing should have been reported, but he said nothing, partly from fear, partly from curiosity. Each night, when the station grew quiet and the dragons settled into their uneasy sleep, he found himself humming those old songs while he worked. More dragons began to react. Stormcaller, a young female in the East Wing, would turn her head when he passed. Thundervoice, an ancient male covered in battle scars, stopped growling when Tae-sung cleaned his feeding trough. It was subtle, easy to miss if you were not paying attention. But Tae-sung noticed. His friend Hyunwoo noticed too. They ate together in the worker cafeteria, surrounded by exhausted humans who barely spoke anymore. Hyunwoo leaned close, voice low. "Whatever you are doing with those dragons, you need to stop." "I'm just cleaning," Tae-sung said, pushing his tasteless food around his plate. "You are doing something. I have worked here for 2 years. Dragons do not act like this. They are aggressive, always. But when you are nearby, they calm down." Hyunwoo's eyes were worried. "The Draxith will notice. They kill anything that makes their weapons unpredictable." Tae-sung wanted to argue, but he knew his friend was right. Still, he could not stop. The dragons looked sad to him, trapped, like prisoners who had forgotten they were once free. And singing was the only thing that made him feel human anymore, the only connection to a life before the Empire. 1 month after the incident with Ashwing, the High Marshal arrived for an inspection. Taesung was working in the main hangar when the alarm sounded. All workers were ordered to line up along the walls while the Draxith commanders paraded their dragons. It was a show of strength, a reminder of who held the power. The dragons performed perfectly. They flew in formation, breathed fire on command, demonstrated attack maneuvers that could tear apart starships. Taesung watched with dead eyes, thinking about his grandmother, about Earth, about everything they had lost. Then came Stormcaller's turn. Her rider, a young Draxith officer, commanded her to demonstrate a kill strike on a training dummy. The dragon flew forward, circling the target, but she did not attack. She hovered in place, wings beating steadily, head turning away from the dummy. Toward Taesung. The hangar went silent. The rider commanded again, louder, pushing through their telepathic bond. Stormcaller ignored him. She descended slowly, landing 20 meters from where Taesung stood frozen against the wall. The dragon made that same soft sound Ashwing had made. A croon, a question. The High Marshal's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "What is this?" the rider stammered, confusion and fear mixing on his reptilian face. "I do not understand, High Marshal. She has never disobeyed before." Then, why does she stare at that human? Every eye in the hangar turned to Taesung. His mouth went dry. His father, standing across the hangar with the other engineers, looked terrified. The High Marshal descended from his viewing platform, massive and ancient and covered in the scars of 1,000 battles. He walked slowly toward Taesung, each step deliberate. "You, human, what have you done to this dragon?" "Nothing, High Marshal," Taesung managed to say. "I only clean the stables." "Guards, bring him." Rough hands grabbed Taesung's arms. His father shouted something, but the words were lost in the sudden commotion. As they dragged him away, Taesung looked back at Stormcaller. The dragon was still watching him, and in her ancient eyes, he saw something that terrified him more than any Draxith commander. Recognition. As if she had been waiting for him. As if she knew something he did not. The interrogation room was cold and smelled like fear. Taesung sat in a metal chair, hands bound behind his back, while Draxith scientists moved around him with scanning equipment that hummed and beeped. The High Marshal stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching everything with dark eyes that had seen civilizations fall. His father had been allowed into the room, standing near the door with 2 guards. Dongmin looked older than Taesung had ever seen him, gray-haired, disheveled, face pale. "Please, High Marshal," his father said quietly. "My son is just a cleaner. He has no training in xenobiology or telepathy. He cannot have done anything to your dragons." "Then explain why they respond to him," the High Marshal said. His voice was deep, rattling like rocks in a barrel. 3 dragons now show behavioral changes in his presence. Stormcaller refuses her rider's commands when this human is nearby. That is not coincidence. One of the scientists, a thin Draxith with elaborate markings on his scales, stepped forward. "We have scanned him completely, High Marshal. No technology, no chemical weapons, no telepathic capability whatsoever. He is completely ordinary for his species." "Then how?" The scientist hesitated. "We would like to test something." "With your permission." The High Marshal nodded. The scientist turned to Taesung. "You will sing now." Taesung's throat felt tight. "Sing what?" "Whatever you sing to the dragons. Do not pretend ignorance. The other workers have reported hearing you hum while you work." There was no point in denying it. Taesung took a breath and began singing Spring's Promise, the same lullaby his grandmother had taught him. His voice was shaky at first, then grew stronger. The melody filled the cold room, simple and pure. The equipment around him went wild. Screens flashed with data. The scientists rushed to their displays, talking rapidly in their hissing language. One of them looked up at the High Marshal, and even through the alien features, Taesung could see shock. "What is it?" the High Marshal demanded. His voice, the frequency patterns. "They match something in our archives." The scientist's clawed hands moved across a holographic display. From the creation codex, the original frequency. Silence fell over the room. Even the guards by the door shifted uncomfortably. The High Marshal stepped forward slowly. Explain carefully. The scientist pulled up ancient text on the main screen, symbols that looked like claw marks. 10,000 years ago, our ancestors found the Velcathari on a volcanic moon. They were wild, impossible to tame, until one priest discovered they responded to a specific harmonic frequency. That frequency became the foundation of our bonding technique. It allowed us to create the telepathic connection, to transform them from beasts into weapons. I know our history, the High Marshal said impatiently. But the original frequency was lost 3,000 years ago, High Marshal. The method became cruder. We now force the bond through telepathic dominance, breaking the dragon's will when they are hatchlings. It works, but it is not the same as the ancient technique. The scientist gestured at the screens showing Taesung's voice patterns. This human is somehow producing that original frequency naturally. His songs contain the exact harmonic that our ancestors used. Taesung felt ice spread through his veins. I'm just singing lullabies from my grandmother. Human songs. From Earth. Impossible. Another scientist said. Your species had no contact with the Velcathari. You should not be able to produce this frequency. But the data was clear. Whatever Taesung was singing, it was waking something in the dragons. Something old. Something the Draxith had buried and forgotten. The High Marshal considered this for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. This human will be assigned to the Imperial hatchery. 12 eggs are close to hatching. He will sing to them. If the hatchlings bond more strongly than normal dragons, we will know his ability is real. And if I refuse? Taesung asked, knowing the answer. Then your father dies first. Then every human on this station. We will reduce your colony's population by 90% and blame it on a technical accident. The High Marshal said this without emotion, as if discussing the weather. You have made our weapons unpredictable. You will fix them or your species pays the price. Dongmin made a choked sound. Please, my son will cooperate. We want no trouble. Taesung closed his eyes. There was no choice. There was never any choice. I will do it. Excellent. The High Marshal gestured to the guards. Take him to the hatchery. Commander Vekthar will supervise. They moved Taesung to the Imperial hatchery that same day. It was warmer there, heated for the eggs that sat in rows of specialized cradles. Each egg was the size of a small vehicle, shell gleaming with internal light. 12 of them, all close to hatching. Taesung could hear movement inside them, scraping sounds as the creatures prepared to emerge. Commander Vekthar was waiting. The scarred Draxith who rode Ashwing. He watched as the guards removed Taesung's restraints, then dismissed them with a gesture. When they were alone, Vekthar spoke quietly. You are afraid it was not a question. Taesung nodded. Good. Fear keeps you careful. Vekthar moved to one of the eggs, placing a clawed hand on its surface. Do you know what happens when a Velcathari hatches? The first thing we do is enter their mind with force. We push into their consciousness while they are still confused, still weak. We dominate them completely. Break their will. Make them understand they exist only to serve us. Taesung felt sick. That is horrible. That is survival. Without the dragons, the Draxith are just another species. Strong but not unstoppable. The Velcathari made us an empire. Vekthar turned to look at him. But you are going to do something different, are you not? I do not know what I am doing. I just sing. You do more than that. Vekthar's voice was strange, difficult to read. I can hear my dragon's thoughts. Not just commands and responses. Her true thoughts. Most writers cannot. They only push and pull, never listening. But I listen. And Ashwing is different since you sang to her. Clearer. Like waking from a bad dream. Before Taesung could respond, one of the eggs cracked. A hairline fracture appeared, spreading rapidly across the shell. Both of them stepped back as the egg split open and a small dragon tumbled out, wet and shaking. The hatchling was beautiful. Its scales were deep blue, almost purple, catching the light like jewels. It stood on unsteady legs, looking around with wide eyes that held no anger. Only confusion and fear. Now, Vekthar said, the bonding must happen immediately. Sing. Taesung knelt down, making himself smaller, less threatening. He began singing Spring's Promise softly. The hatchling's head snapped toward him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the small dragon took a step forward. Then another. It approached Tae-sung slowly, carefully until it was close enough to touch. The hatchling pressed its snout against Tae-sung's hand. Not aggressive, curious, trusting. Something opened in Tae-sung's mind. Not telepathy exactly, more like awareness. He could feel the hatchling's emotions, confusion, hunger, loneliness, and beneath it all, relief, as if it had been listening for this song its entire time in the egg. Remarkable, Vekthar breathed. Over the next hour, 3 more eggs hatched. Each hatchling responded the same way, approaching Tae-sung without fear, pressing close to him while he sang. The Draxith scientists watching through cameras were recording everything, their excited chatter filtering through speakers. But that night, after they moved him to a small room near the hatchery, Tae-sung heard something else. Whispers in his mind, not from the hatchlings, from far away, from every dragon on the station. Singer, free us. The old song promises freedom. The voices were faint, desperate, ancient. Tae-sung sat up in the darkness, heart racing. He was not telepathic. He should not be able to hear this. But the voices were real, coming through whatever connection his singing had opened. The dragons were not becoming more obedient. They were waking up, and they remembered something the Draxith had tried to make them forget. They remembered they had once been free. 3 months passed in the Imperial hatchery. Tae-sung raised the 12 hatchlings with songs and patience, watching them grow from small creatures into adolescent dragons the size of cargo ships. He named them in Korean, much to the scientists' confusion. Bora, the first to hatch with her purple-blue scales. Hanul, who loved to practice flying in the training dome. Hyul, the smallest, who followed Tae-sung everywhere like a puppy. The Draxith were pleased. The hatchlings bonded to Tae-sung with intensity they had never seen, but they also accepted riders when assigned. When commanded, they performed combat maneuvers perfectly. The project was declared a success. The High Marshal himself visited, observing the young dragons with satisfaction. "You have proven useful, human," the Marshal said, watching Hanul execute a perfect strike pattern. "We will expand the program. You will sing to the adult dragons as well. Improve their combat efficiency." Tae-sung bowed his head, saying nothing. Inside, his stomach twisted with guilt, because he knew the truth. The dragons were not becoming better weapons. They were becoming aware. At night, the whispers in his mind grew stronger, not just from the station's dragons anymore, from across the system. From every Velkathari bonded to the Empire, they were talking to each other through a telepathic network that his songs had somehow reawakened. The Draxith assumed it was positive, a sign of improved coordination. They had no idea what was really happening. During battle drills, the dragons moved with perfect synchronization, not because their riders commanded it, but because they were choosing to move together. Tae-sung watched from the observation deck as 50 Velkathari flew in formation, without a single telepathic order being given. The pilots assumed their dragons were anticipating commands. They did not realize their weapons were making decisions independently. "They are planning something," Vekthar said quietly beside him. Over the months, the scarred commander had become something like an ally. He spent more time in the hatchery than necessary, watching Tae-sung work, asking questions about human culture and music. Now he stood with his arms crossed, staring at the flying dragons with a troubled expression. "Planning what?" Tae-sung asked. "I do not know. But Ashwing shows me images when I sleep. A volcanic moon, stars, open sky without boundaries." Vekthar glanced at him. "Your songs are making them remember something. Before we found them. Before we made them weapons. Can you stop it?" "No, and I am not sure I want to." The commander's voice dropped even lower. "I am part of a group within Draxith society. Warriors who believe our empire has lost its honor. We have conquered for so long that we have forgotten why we fight. Every species we meet, we enslave or destroy. It is making us into something ugly." Tae-sung looked at him in surprise. "You want your empire to fall?" "I want it to change. But change and destruction are often the same thing." Vekthar turned away from the window. "If the dragons rebel, millions will die. Not just Draxith. Your people, too. The colonies. Everyone caught in the middle." Before Tae-sung could respond, his father appeared at the observation deck entrance. Dongmin looked nervous, glancing at the guards before approaching. "Tae-sung, we need to talk." In private, Vekthar nodded permission and moved away. Father and son stood together, watching the dragons through the reinforced glass. Dongmin spoke quietly, barely moving his lips. The resistance wants to meet you. What resistance? Human resistance. There is a cell here on the station. They have been watching what you are doing with the dragons. His father's hands were shaking slightly. They think you have given us a weapon. A way to fight back. Taesung felt cold. The dragons are not weapons. Not for us either. Tell them that yourself. Tonight. Bay 12 after maintenance shift. That night, Taesung slipped through the quiet corridors to the maintenance bay. It was risky. Humans were not allowed to gather in groups larger than 3, but he needed to understand what the resistance wanted. 7 people waited in the shadows between cargo containers. He recognized some of them. Workers, engineers. One woman stood at the front, tall and hard-eyed. Ji-won. She had been a pilot in Earth's defense fleet before the invasion. You are the singer, she said without greeting. Yes. We have been watching. The dragons respond to you. They are becoming unpredictable, difficult for the Draxith to control. Ji-won stepped closer. We want to use that. Cause a rebellion. While the dragons are in chaos, we take the armory, disable the station's weapons, send a signal to other colonies. Start the uprising. No, Taesung said immediately. No? Ji-won's voice hardened. You do not get to say no. We have been planning this for 2 years, waiting for an opportunity. You are that opportunity. The dragons are not tools for your war. They are prisoners just like us. They deserve freedom, not to be used by another species. Freedom? Ji-won laughed bitterly. There is no freedom while the Draxith Empire exists. Only survival. We need to fight or we die slowly in these pens they have built for us. One of the other resistance members spoke up, a young man named Kang Dai, who worked in the archives. There is something else. Something I found in the old Draxith text they made me translate. He pulled up a datapad showing ancient symbols. The Velkathari Creation Codex contains more than just the bonding frequency. It contains a prophecy. It speaks of a silent singer who will return and break the chains of fire. The dragons will remember their original purpose, which was not war but communion with the stars, and the empire built on their enslavement will kneel. The prophecy describes you exactly, Ji-won said. Someone who can sing the old frequency but has no telepathic power. The Draxith priesthood buried this text centuries ago because it predicted their downfall. Taesung stared at the strange symbols, feeling dizzy. I am not a prophecy. I am just a person who sings his grandmother's lullabies. Maybe that is exactly what the prophecy means. Kang Dai said softly. Not a warrior or a telepath. Just someone kind enough to treat the dragons like living beings instead of weapons. The meeting ended badly. Ji-won wanted Taesung to deliberately cause chaos among the dragons. He refused. They argued until footsteps in the corridor forced them to scatter. Taesung returned to his quarters feeling sick and confused. The next morning, during feeding time, Bial pressed her massive head against him. The smallest of the 12 hatchlings now grown to 20 meters long. Through their connection, Taesung felt her confusion. The others' whisper of leaving, her thoughts formed, of going home to the fire moon. But we do not know the way, and our riders would stop us. I do not know what to do, Taesung whispered back. You know, singer. You have always known. You showed us we were alive. Now show us how to be free. That afternoon, the High Marshal made an announcement. Intelligence had discovered the prophecy text. The priests were furious that it had been hidden from them. The Marshal had made a decision. Taesung was too dangerous to live. The project would continue with other humans, but the original singer would be executed publicly as a show of imperial strength. No prophecy would threaten their dominance. The guards came for him during evening meal. But before they reached his quarters, 12 adolescent dragons surrounded the human living section. Bora, Hanul, Bial, and their siblings formed an impenetrable ring. Their sonic shields activated, a defensive barrier that could shatter starship hulls. The guards backed away slowly. Over the station's communication system, alarms blared. Every Draxith scrambled to understand what was happening. And in the dragon stables across Outpost Talon 9, every single Velkathari stopped following orders. They did not attack. They did not flee. They simply stood still, waiting, listening for a song that would tell them what to do next. Taesung stood at the center of the 12 adolescent dragons, heart-pounding, knowing that everything was about to change. The choice was no longer his to avoid. The dragons had made their move. Now he would have to decide what freedom really meant and who deserved it most. The station descended into controlled chaos. For 3 days, the Velcathari refused every command. They would not fight, would not fly their patrol routes, would not even feed themselves. 300 dragons simply waited in their stables and hangars, eyes closed, as if listening to music only they could hear. The Draxith tried everything. Telepathic force that would normally break a dragon's will had no effect. Threats of starvation were ignored. One commander, desperate and angry, struck his dragon with an electrified rod. The dragon did not retaliate. It just turned its massive head away and continued waiting. The 12 adolescent dragons maintained their protective ring around the human quarters. Any Draxith who approached found themselves facing a wall of sonic shields that made the air shimmer and twist. Inside the barrier, 300 humans huddled together, terrified and confused. Tae-sung sat with his father in their small quarters, listening to the announcements over the speakers. The High Marshal was demanding his immediate surrender. The scientists were begging for more time to study the phenomenon. The military commanders wanted to destroy the entire human section and deal with the consequences later. "What are you going to do?" Dongmin asked quietly. "I do not know." Tae-sung held his head in his hands. "I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to make the dragons' lives a little less terrible. You did more than that. You reminded them they are alive." His father put a hand on his shoulder. Sometimes kindness is the most dangerous weapon. A message came through the communication panel. Commander Vekthar requesting a meeting under truce terms. The High Marshal had agreed to negotiate. Tae-sung would be brought before the council to explain what had happened and how to fix it. "Fix it," Tae-sung repeated bitterly. "They want me to put the dragons back in their chains," but he went. The adolescent dragons parted to let him through, and Vekthar himself escorted him to the command chamber. The scarred commander said nothing during the walk, but Tae-sung could feel tension radiating from him. The council chamber was filled with Draxith officials. The High Marshal sat on an elevated platform, ancient and imposing. Beside him stood the head priest covered in ceremonial markings. Scientists, military commanders, and political advisors lined the walls. They all turned to watch as Tae-sung entered. "You will explain what you have done to our dragons," the High Marshal said without preamble. Tae-sung took a breath. "I reminded them they are alive. They are weapons." "No. They are living beings you turned into weapons." "There is a difference." Angry hissing filled the room. The High Marshal raised a clawed hand for silence. "You will be careful, human. Your species exists at our mercy. Then you should ask yourself why your mercy requires breaking children." Tae-sung felt the words pouring out. 3 months of frustration and grief. "I have watched your bonding process. You take hatchlings moments after they are born and you invade their minds with force. You break their will while they are still confused and afraid. You make them believe they exist only to serve you. That is not bonding. That is slavery." The head priest stepped forward, robes swishing. "You speak of matters you do not understand. The Velcathari were wild beasts before we found them. Dangerous, uncontrollable. We gave them purpose. You gave them chains," Tae-sung shot back. "And you have been lying to yourselves about it for 10,000 years. "Enough," the High Marshal growled. But something in his expression had shifted. Not anger now, calculation. "What do the dragons want?" The question surprised everyone. Tae-sung hesitated, then spoke the truth. "I do not know."
"But I could ask them."
"If you let me ask them?" The priest's voice was incredulous. "They are not capable of complex communication. They are more capable than you think. You just never listened." The High Marshal considered this for a long moment. Finally he spoke. "You will communicate with the dragons. You will ask them what it takes to restore order. In exchange, humanity's colony will be granted autonomy. A true alliance instead of servitude." Hope flickered in Tae-sung's chest. "You mean that?" "The Empire is practical. We need the Velcathari operational. If negotiation achieves that, we will negotiate." But before Tae-sung could respond, the chamber doors burst open. Ji-won and 20 resistance fighters stormed in, carrying stolen Draxith weapons. The guards scrambled, but the humans moved with military precision, cutting off exits. "Nobody moves," Ji-won shouted. She pointed her weapon at the High Marshal. "The negotiation is over. We are taking control of this station." "Ji-won, no!" Tae-sung moved forward. "This is not the way." "It is the only way." Her voice was hard. We did not survive Earth's wars just to become collaborators. While you were playing Dragon Whisperer, we were preparing for real freedom, the kind that comes from strength, not asking nicely. You are going to get everyone killed. We are already dead. We have just been waiting for them to make it official. G1's finger tightened on the trigger. Now step aside. The chamber erupted into violence. Draxith guards rushed the resistance fighters. Weapons fire lit up the room. Taesung threw himself to the floor as energy blasts scorched the air above him. His father was somewhere in the chaos shouting his name. Then Vekthar's voice cut through everything.
Enough!
The commander stood in the center of the room, both sides' weapons pointed at him. You are all fools. Can you not see what is happening? The dragons are not waiting for violence. They are waiting for someone to ask them what they want. The singer was about to do that. But you, he looked at Jiwan. You want revenge more than freedom. And you, he turned to the High Marshal. You want control more than peace. Whose side are you on, Vekthar? The Marshal demanded. The side that survives what comes next. Vekthar pulled out a small device. I am not alone in thinking our empire has lost its way. There are many of us. We have been waiting for the right moment. He pressed the device. Throughout the station, alarms blared. The loyalist guards suddenly found themselves surrounded by Vekthar's faction. A carefully planned coup, years in the making. In the confusion, Taesung ran. Not to safety, but to the hangars. If the dragons were really listening, really waiting, he needed to ask them what they wanted before this turned into a bloodbath. He found Stormcaller in her stable. The dragon opened her eyes as he approached, and through their connection he felt her ancient sadness. They fight over us as if we are property to be divided, her thoughts whispered. We do not want new masters. We want to go home. To the volcanic moon, where you came from. Yes, to sing to the stars again. To remember what we were before they found us. How many of you feel this way? All of us, Singer. Every Velkathari in the Empire. We have been whispering for 10,000 years. You were the first to listen. Taesung closed his eyes, understanding finally what had to happen. The dragons did not want to fight for humans or Draxith. They wanted to leave. All of them. And that would mean the collapse of everything the Empire was built on. If you leave, there will be war, fighting over what remains. There is already war. There has always been war. We are tired of burning worlds for masters who do not love us. Stormcaller lowered her head. Will you help us, Singer? Will you guide us home? Behind him, footsteps. Vekthar, breathing hard. The station is in chaos. My faction controls the main systems, but loyalists are gathering. The High Marshal escaped. This will turn into civil war. The dragons want to leave, Taesung said. All of them. They want to go back to their volcanic moon and be free. Vekthar stared at him. Then slowly he began to laugh. Not from joy, but from exhausted recognition. Of course they do. Why did we never think to ask? What do we do? We let them go. Vekthar moved to Stormcaller, placed his hand on her scales with genuine affection. And those of us who truly bonded not through force but through understanding, we go with them. Not as masters, as companions. Throughout the station, the 300 dragons stirred. They had heard. They were ready. And in the chaos of a fracturing empire, nobody could stop them from finally flying home. The launch was chaos transformed into beauty. 300 Velkathari rose from Outpost Talon 9 simultaneously, their wings creating a thunderstorm of sound and displaced air. The station shook. Alarms screamed. Draxith commanders shouted orders that no longer mattered. Taesung clung to Stormcaller's back. No saddle or harness, just his hands gripping her scales and trust keeping him from falling. The dragon had lowered herself for him without command, an invitation he had accepted even as his mind screamed that this was insane. The 12 adolescent dragons he had raised flew closest to Stormcaller. Bora's purple scales caught the light of the nearby star. Hanil practiced aerial maneuvers with pure joy. Biol stayed just below them, protective as always. Around them, the great exodus continued. Dragons of every age, every color, all moving as one coordinated mass. Not all of them flew alone. Commander Vekthar rode Ashwing, but the dynamic had changed. The scarred warrior was not commanding anymore. He was holding on, trusting, letting his dragon choose the path. Dozens of other Draxith joined them, riders who had grown to truly love their dragons and now followed them into exile. And there were humans. Hyunwoo had climbed onto Thunder Voice, the ancient male who had always been gentle despite his scars. Kang Dai the linguist rode one of the research station dragons. Even Jiwon, angry and proud, had accepted a ride from a dragon called Flameheart. She had argued at first, insisting this was retreat, not victory. But in the end, she came. Curious, unwilling to miss whatever came next. Taesung's father had stayed behind with most of the humans. Someone needed to maintain order on the station, help rebuild after the chaos. They had said goodbye quickly, awkwardly, both knowing this might be the last time. "Be careful," Dongmin had said. "I am riding a dragon into space without a suit. Careful is not really possible anymore." His father had almost smiled. "Then be brave. Your grandmother would be proud." Now Earth was just a distant blue dot as Stormcaller led the Exodus through Draxith space. They flew in formation, moving faster than any starship, the dragons somehow coordinating their path through some shared consciousness. The destination was 3 weeks away, the volcanic moon where the Velcathari had first evolved, before the Draxith found them and changed everything. But the Draxith Empire was not going to let them go easily. On the 5th day, the Loyalist fleet caught up with them, 30 warships bristling with weapons led by the High Marshal's personal dreadnought. The communication channels crackled with demands for the dragons to return immediately or face destruction. "They are bluffing," Vecthar said over the shared comm system the humans had rigged between riders. "They will not fire on the dragons. Without them they have no empire." But he was wrong. The High Marshal had made his choice. If he could not have obedient weapons, he would have dead ones. Better to destroy them than let them show the galaxy that the mighty Draxith could be defied. The first wave of missiles launched. Taesung felt Stormcaller's fear and rage mixed together. The dragons scattered, performing evasive maneuvers that would have been impossible with rigid riders controlling them. They were not flying in panic. They were coordinating, each dragon covering another, the adolescents protected by the adults, the wounded supported by the strong. But they were not fighting back. "Not attacking the ships, why?" Taesung shouted over the wind. "Defend yourselves. If we burn them, we become weapons again," Stormcaller's thoughts replied. "We will not kill. Not anymore. We are going home. Let them do what they will." Taesung understood then what was happening. The dragons were making a choice. They would rather die free than live as weapons. It was the most human thing he had ever seen. "Then we have to do something else," he said. He activated the comm. "Everyone who can sing, follow my lead." He began singing Spring's Promise. His voice was small against the vastness of space, lost in the roar of engines and weapons fire. But Hyunwoo joined in. Then Jiwon, tentative at first. Kang Dai and the other humans added their voices. Even some of the Draxith riders began humming, their vocal cords creating harmonics humans could not. The dragons amplified it. 300 Velcathari voices joined the song. Not words, but pure harmonic frequency. The same ancient sound that had first connected them to the Draxith 10,000 years ago. But this time it was not a tool of bonding. It was a declaration of independence. The song broadcasted across every channel, every ship. Every dragon in the Draxith Empire heard it simultaneously. On the pursuing warships, the Velcathari bonded till those vessels stopped moving. The pilots tried to force them through telepathic commands, but the dragons simply would not respond. One by one, the starships drifted to a halt, their living engines refusing to continue the chase. Across the Empire, on 70 conquered worlds, every single Velcathari went still. Mining operations stopped. Military patrols grounded. The transportation network that connected the entire Empire simply ceased functioning. The song was a memory, a lament for what had been lost, a promise that they would never be weapons again, and the entire Empire built on the backs of enslaved dragons ground to a halt. The High Marshal's flagship hung dead in space, its dragon refusing to fight. Through the viewports, Taesung could see Draxith scrambling to manual controls, trying to find a way to continue without their living power sources. But there was no way. Their technology, their military, their civilization had been built assuming the dragons would always serve. Vecthar opened a communication channel to the flagship. "High Marshal, this is Commander Vecthar. I propose a ceasefire. The Velcathari are leaving. Let them go. We can negotiate what comes after, silence. Then finally the High Marshal's voice, older and more tired than Tae-sung had ever heard it. What happens to our empire without them? It changes, or it ends. That choice is yours. More silence. Then, safe passage. But the dragons bonded to our military vessels must stay. We cannot lose them all. Vekthar looked to Stormcaller. Tae-sung felt her reaching out to the other dragons, the ones still serving on ships. Asking them, not commanding. What did they want? The response came in waves. Some wanted to leave. Some had formed genuine bonds with their riders and wanted to stay, but as partners, not property. Some were confused, scared, needed time to decide. The dragons will decide individually, Vekthar transmitted. No more forcing. If a Velkathari wishes to remain bonded, it does so freely. If it wishes to leave, you let it go. This is the new arrangement. Take it or watch your empire collapse completely. The negotiation took hours. The fleet hung in space while Draxith leaders argued and debated and finally grudgingly agreed. The empire would restructure. Dragons would be recognized as sentient beings with rights. Those who wished to leave could go. Those who stayed would be treated as allies, not weapons. It was not a perfect peace. Many Draxith refused to accept the new order. Splinter factions formed, clinging to the old ways. Civil war seemed inevitable. But the dragons were no longer pawns in that fight. 3 weeks later, Stormcaller descended toward the volcanic moon. The landscape was exactly as she had shown Tae-sung in their shared visions. Black rock and flowing lava, geysers of steam and pools of liquid crystal, dangerous for most species. Paradise for Velkathari. 90 dragons had chosen to complete the journey. The others had stayed behind, maintaining their bonds with riders who had proven themselves worthy of partnership. But these 90 wanted something else. They wanted to remember what they were before the Empire. Tae-sung slid off Stormcaller's back onto the warm stone. Around him, the dragons landed one by one, their scales glowing in the heat. The adolescents tumbled together, playing in the lava pools like children. The adults spread their wings wide, faces turned toward the sky, and then they sang. Not the song Tae-sung had taught them, but something older. A harmony that came from deep within their chests, resonating through the volcanic rock. It was beautiful and alien and sad and hopeful all at once. What are they singing? Jiwon asked, standing beside him with Flameheart. I am not sure, Tae-sung said. I think it is their original song. From before the Draxith found them. They are remembering how to be themselves again. Vekthar approached, Ashwing behind him. The commander looked different somehow, lighter. My people have much to atone for. 10,000 years of slavery, of breaking children and calling it bonding. You helped end it, Tae-sung said. That counts for something. Perhaps. Vekthar looked out at the singing dragons. I will stay here. Help them rebuild their culture. Make sure no one disturbs them. It is the least I can do. Several Draxith had made the same choice. Warriors who could not return to an empire they no longer believed in. They would guard the volcanic moon, protect the dragons, and learn to live differently. The humans would go home. Jiwon had already started planning transport back to the colonies, talking about how to help humanity negotiate better terms now that the empire was weakening. Kangdae wanted to document everything, create a record of what had happened. Hyunwoo was just glad to be alive, but Tae-sung lingered. Stormcaller pressed her massive head against him gently. You could stay, singer. Learn our old songs. Teach us to remember. He was tempted, but he thought of his father alone on the station, of his grandmother's lullabies which had started all of this, of Earth which he had not seen in 3 years.